Hey everybody, Derek Brown here, BEATBoX SAX, with another Tuesday tutorial. This is part 2 of my 3-part series on adding counterpoint melodic ideas to your solo playing. So hopefully you got to check out the first in our series where I kind of introduced it, and this idea of having different lines of music with one instrument going on at the same time through alternation. And I talked about some influences, and I just kind of started with this idea of practicing some of these oblique motions, where you have a stable line, one note that stays the same while you have this moving line up above. So check that out if you haven't already, and then come on back. Today I'm just going to give a bunch more exercises, things that have been helpful for me. Once again, the goal is to work on kind of an independence, kind of like piano players work on left hand, right hand. Independence, or some people would say interdependence, but this idea that you can do different things with these different lines, and we're going to try to do the same thing with the saxophone, where we can have a moving line down in the bottom and then a separate moving line at the top to make your playing more interesting and full and dynamic. So to start off, a couple things you can do, going off of what we did last time. This idea of having something that's stationary on the bottom and something moving at the top. One thing you can do is having just like maybe a 2-note idea on one of the lines, and then the other line moves around more. So for instance, here I'm going to have a repeating upper line and move the bass line around. I'm going to think of maybe playing in C minor, my saxophone key of C minor, and I'm going to go back and forth between a C and a B flat at the top while moving the bass around. So that's one thing you can do, or C and E flat. And I occasionally will change it up, but just seeing if you can do that. Another thing you can do is having maybe a bass line, and you can do this, there are infinite possibilities, and that's what's so cool about this. But maybe having a bass line, having 2 notes instead of 1 note, and moving around. So instead of just playing a C and maybe playing a C scale on top, I want to play a C in the 5th, a G, while playing a scale going up and down. Now here I'm going to alternate every other note instead of playing the notes together and then the notes together, like this. So hopefully you caught that. I played a C major scale on the top while alternating with C's and G's. Of course, do this with other scales, do this with other keys. Just anything you can do, see if you can come up with something different every day, just to get your mind working in a different way than it's used to, which is kind of unusual for sax players because we're just, once again, used to just single lines at a time. And this is kind of thinking of it in 2 lines. So the next thing that I would suggest doing is trying some parallel motion. And that's where you just have the 2 lines move in the same direction, the same intervals together. And this is a little bit easier to think about because it's almost like you have just one large line together. So to start out, a basic way of doing that would just be doing octaves. So I'm just going to play, I'll just stick to my key of C. I'll play a C major scale alternating octaves. So C, C, D, D, E, and so forth. Or I could do 2 octaves. Like I mentioned the last time, the further you widen the distance between your 2 lines, the more independent they seem, at least to me. So here's now 2 octaves separating it. Now, obviously, that's a little bit more difficult, requires a little more practice. It's not as easy as just using the octave key when you do 2 octaves, but that will come more natural. And all this stuff, even if you're not doing this in a beatbox style, can be really cool to use in a solo. You've probably heard musicians do that in the past. Or and just random things where you have large leaps to break up kind of a more melodic-based solo. Another thing is the interval of a third, or more accurately, a tenth, is something I like to do. An octave and a third going on. I'll just stick with my C major scale. So I'm going to go C up to an E, D up to an F, and so forth. Then do it with minor. That's just a cool thing. You could do fifths. You could do sixths. Sixths are something I've heard a lot of piano players and guitar players do just in normal solos. I think this kind of sound. Those are sixths. So those can all be effective things as well. So that's, once again, that is an example of parallel movement, where you have these things moving together. And just with those ideas, you can do so much. So I'm actually going to leave you there with, I think, plenty to practice. Once again, come up with your own stuff, try your own intervals, just experiment. The next tutorial, I'm going to talk about kind of putting things together and adding now some percussion in there as well. So hopefully this was helpful for you to spark some new ideas. And yeah, I'll see you next Tuesday. Happy practicing.